Anyway, I met this guy. I met him at a bus stop, and he told me all the co-ops that he bought from and all the co-ops I should go visit every weekend. And that's how I made this initial contact with the weaving co-op that I now work with. And that was 22 years ago. 2 years after that, they said to me, will you sell at the Cultural Survival Craft Fair, which was near my home in Cambridge? And I said, yes. And everybody loved the stuff. And I loved having a connection with Guatemala. So that was the beginning of my business, completely unplanned. But I would say about my business that the philosophy behind it is to make as much well-paying, dignified work for artisans here, indigenous artisans who are really beset by the terrible trauma of genocide, racism, extreme poverty, and complete neglect by their governments. And part of it to me is reparations for what the US has done in Guatemala. And the governments that the United States and its corporations have supported. I just have to say that right off the bat. I thought I'd go through the fair trade principles. I'll share my screen, and my thought was to talk about them. I could actually, maybe I'll show the video first, and then I'll talk about the fair trade principles and just some of the interesting challenges that come up in running a fair trade business. So can you all see my screen?
I don't know.
Not yet, no.
We can see you.
Okay, let's see. Share screen. Okay, good. Here we go. Can you see me with the volcano behind me?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Here are some photos from our in-person events.
Tinoy lakti khas, chokla enule,
Let's meet some of the artisans. First up, Asociación Maya, a women's cooperative of 180 backstrap loom weavers working together for almost 35 years. Members are widows of the 36-year genocide against indigenous people in Guatemala, and now their daughters too. They live in 6 rural communities in the highlands above Lake Atitlan. To make their beautiful weavings, first they wind skeins of lightweight bamboo, bamboo chenille, or cotton using a manual skein winder. The yarn is then hand dyed in small batches, 4 to 6 different colors per skein, using azo-free dyes that are mixed to create each color. This space dyeing creates an ikat effect in which the colors flow beautifully throughout the weaving in a unique way. Skeins are then hung to dry. Then it is put on the swift, and La Ordidora creates the warp, the weaving's vertical threads using a warping board, all while keeping count. The warp and the weft skein are knotted together, and off they go to the weavers in their communities an hour away from the central workshop. The backstrap loom is the traditional form of weaving for women. Every part of the loom has a name related to childbirth. It takes about 4 hours to weave a scarf. The weavings are taken back to the workshop, washed with fabric softener, and laid out to dry. They are inspected for quality and the fringes knotted. The co-op's tailors, some of the best in Guatemala, make beautiful ponchos, jackets, handbags, wallets, and more, and now masks made from lined lightweight bamboo weavings. These luscious handwoven pieces are then packed and shipped to customers all over the world. Trade shows in Guatemala help in finding new customers. At the co-op's annual meeting, all members gather to hear from the staff and board, elect board members, share a meal, and receive their patronage refund, their share of the co-op's profits, or savings as they are called in co-ops. Most of the original members never had a chance to attend school and are illiterate, so they use their thumbprint to sign the annual meeting minutes. A nice tradition is that each weaver gives the co-op 5 quetzales, about 75 cents, a symbol of her gratitude for being part of the co-op. Weavers make 3 to 6 times more money per day via the co-op than they would weaving for the local market. Say what? So let's see. There's another minute or so of nice photos, which I'll show at the end. I'm going to put the fair trade principles up here and just go through them. I thought I'd talk about just some of the issues and challenges that come up in doing fair trade, and especially in reference to the groups that I work with, and especially the weaving co-op. And then maybe I'll try to sort of move through this fairly quickly so that we can have Q&A and discussion. So the first one is cultivating new market opportunities and helping to alleviate poverty through ongoing long-term trading partnerships that put the interests of the producers and their communities as the primary concern. A few things I want to say about, well, first of all, about how the pandemic has affected this, because it's very much affected artisans' income. There are very few in-person events, and the in-person events that there are have lower attendance than they used to have. And so, for instance, I've had to completely take my business online, which has been a huge amount of work. And especially if you know how many, my marketing has been, have a whole bunch of different products, and some people will find something for themselves from everything I offer. Very different from a lot of online stores that have maybe 100 products. I have like 1,000. Wow. So I know. And the other thing that's affected people is, well, there's been very little tourism in Guatemala, and the airport was closed, so people couldn't even come in. A lot of tourists that come from Guatemala City to these indigenous areas really don't spend their money. They look and they don't spend their money. So it's really affected people not having a local market for their crafts. The other thing that's happened is the price of materials has gone up. The price of beads has gone up like 50%, and people really can't very easily just raise their prices. Another thing I learned about just a couple of days ago was, you know, a lot of the colors they use are rainbow colors, and they're out of stock of 3 of the 6 rainbow colors. And why is this? So it's explained to me that the supplier in Guatemala City, who supplies check beads for the entire country, died, probably of COVID. The person running the business now doesn't really understand the business and doesn't really ask the customers what they need and doesn't take their advice. So they're ordering stuff that people don't need. And then I said to my friend who has a beading business, well, what about just starting another a distributor in Guatemala? And he said, they have it arranged with the customs people in the government of Guatemala that they are a monopoly that imports check glass beads. And so anybody else who imports check glass beads, they will put like 100% duty on to basically discourage them from creating another business. And this is how, you know, the sort of corruption around here plays out and really affects people. Another thing is like how they really are dependent for a lot of things, like the dye for the weavers comes from the United States. The stainless steel earring wires. There are lots of things that you can't really get in Guatemala that are necessary to have for a high quality item. The next one is develop transparent and accountable relationships. Relationships that are open, fair, consistent, respectful, value and equitable distribution of power. So, I mean, this is to me, it's very interesting because we're 2 very different cultures working with each other. And inevitably, I, as the person with money, have more power in the relationship. So it takes a lot of work and consciousness not to let that play out in taking advantage of people, you know? I mean, it's this way in all sorts of unequal relationships. So this relationship with the co-op, the weaving co-op, has been 20 years of building trust with them, that I really have their best interests at heart when I advise them about something, or bring a problem to them, or anything that comes up in a business relationship. And now many of them are friends as well, but especially in a context where there's been genocide, it takes a lot of time and effort and consistency. Like, I can't get angry at them. Anger is an emotion that is completely unacceptable in this culture, because everybody understands that if somebody's angry with them, somebody could get killed. I mean, it's that level of trauma that's just beneath the surface. I mean, it's been very interesting. I feel like I brought all my clinical social work skills to building relationships with people. And we have, from coming from a business environment and just a culture in the North, our ideas are different, about how things should run. And like, here's an example at the co-op. Partly, I think it's because of a lack of education. They're very concrete thinkers. So, for instance, every time they get an order from Novica, which is a big online fair trade business, the Novica order has 50 lines of products, and it's got all the Novica product codes. So rather than saying to Novica, please fill in our form when you place your order, or having a chart that has the Novica product code and the co-op's product code, they go and look up every single product code and write it on the order. Which, I mean, to me, I'm like, oh my God, you're wasting so much time. You know what I mean? Like, there are some places where systems just aren't happening, or inventory control. Fortunately, this co-op does so well that it almost doesn't matter. They can manage to go through a lot of inefficiencies and still do really well. Let's see. Well, here's another thing that the co-op had. The founder 35 years ago was this guy from Canada who had worked with Guatemalan refugees in Mexico. And, I met him when I first met the co-op. And then the first time I came down here and spent a significant amount of time when he was here, I really observed it was a very abusive relationship, and that he was a very big fish in a small pond, and he had his issues. And this happens with clients who take advantage of trading relationships and their own power within that relationship, to not show respect for people here, and to pay less. And because people are so poor, they're willing to work for anything just to get food on the table. So that was one of the first things I did when I was spending more time down here. I took them to meet other co-ops. They went and visited other boards of directors of their co-ops. They talked about what was an appropriate relationship with a customer. And finally, they set a limit with this guy, and he's not involved with them anymore. And they've really blossomed through being really able to manage their own business, as opposed to him butting in literally every other day. But I've seen how this plays out. People show up and they say, oh, I'm fair trade and I blah, blah, blah. And will you make this beaded handbag for me? And I'll pay you $5 for it. Well, it's a $20 item, and getting the artisans to realize that they don't have to say, okay, I'll do it for $5, is part of the education and building capacity, which is the next thing. Supporting them to be sustainable and to have the information they need to be able to reach the market with a good product, and all of that. So that takes into account some of what I just said. Promoting fair trade, this is really important, just helping people understand what is involved in fair trade and having a commitment to doing that kind of education.
let's see, paying promptly and fairly. This means, not taking products on credit, but instead supplying the artisans with credit, or at least paying when you receive the products, not just taking things on consignment. And also paying within the local context. Fair trade does not mean that somebody here makes what a weaver in the United States would make for weaving a scarf. It's a completely different context. But it means paying, at least what the minimum wage is. In Guatemala with weavings, especially backstrap loom weaving, which is very labor intensive, people tend to make $1 or $2 a day if they're weaving for somebody, for the market. And the weavers at the co-op make $8 to $10 a day. So it really makes a difference for their life, their ability to send their kids to school. School costs money here. You have to pay for the school supplies and the gym outfit and the uniform and the transportation, and all of that adds up to more than a lot of people can afford if they're not paid halfway decently. Another thing about pricing, which can be interesting to me. Some people think fair trade means that the person running the fair trade business is a volunteer basically and makes no money. But in order for something to be sustainable and for other people to look at it and say, yeah, I want to do that too, there has to be at least a modest living that is able to be made. And it's interesting, some people sell these fair trade items practically at cost and are volunteering. And some people, especially people who are really into, calling themselves designers, and they more sell at super high-end markets, luxury goods, handbags that cost $400 each retail. One hopes that they're paying attention to what they're paying the artisans too, and at least taking some of that profit and putting it towards helping communities where these artisans live. My philosophy has always been to keep my prices as reasonable as I can so that I sell more, so that I can order more, which is the whole point, to make more work for people rather than have a scarf. Like a lot of the scarves that I sell for anywhere from $49 to $119 at other businesses in the States that sell them. But I would rather sell mine for $45 and sell a lot more of them, The other thing that comes up with pay is that pretty much all of this work is piecework. So what is a fair wage? And to really help these groups figure out what is fair to pay. People tend not to sit down and work for 8 hours a day. They tend to work at home. They might work for a couple hours. They go make lunch. They take care of their kids. They do their laundry. They sit down and do more work. So it's interesting doing these time studies and seeing well, if they did work 8 hours, what, that they at least make that decent rate of pay. And the other problem, I bring up a bunch of the problems just because it's not quite so simple, The other problem is a lot of these groups are organized relatively informally, and they don't have formal accounting systems. And it's not like I can go in and say, I want to see your bookkeeping and I want to see what you really are paying people. And just, it's just not available. So it's really I found through relationships, just asking a lot of questions and developing trust, and also telling people, they say to me, well, you can have this for this price. And I know it's not a good price. I know it's not paying them enough, and I pay them more. Let's see. And, there's always the, needing to work so badly that they agree to sell at a lower than fair price. It's really unfortunate. anyway, support safe and empowering working conditions. Let's see. Well, a work environment free of exploitation, where people can participate in the decisions that affect them and where there's not discrimination. It's interesting there, you know, I mentioned in the video that most of the women, at least the founding women, their daughters have generally had a chance to go to school and learn to read and write, have some education. But many of the older women in the co-op really never, they might have gone to first grade. And many of them aren't literate, and many of them are very basic familiarity with, you know, numbers that they need in their daily lives, but reading a financial statement is not something they're adept at. It's interesting that at this point, over a third of the women in the co-op have served on the board of directors of the co-op over the course of all these years. So they've gotten some education by being more intimately involved with the co-op. In co-ops, you would think that, I mean, at least in the United States, everything's transparent. There's a financial statement, the owners, the members, the staff know what the finances are. It's interesting with the co-op and Solo Law that they have their financial report at the annual meeting, and the financial report is their operating statement. So it's how much the sales were and what their expenses were and what the profits were or the savings for the year. But they never present the balance sheet. And the reason for this, and I understand it, is if they put up there that the co-op has $100,000 in assets, part of which they've now invested in buying land for a new building and paying an architect, but they have all this money in the bank. If they told people that, somebody would mention it to their brother, who would kidnap somebody and hold them for the ransom of all the assets of the co-op. And this happens, it happens in, generally speaking, with wealthier people, but it also has happened in these communities where these weavers live, where, you know, one of their children's been kidnapped and held for ransom. So it's with real, you know, they know their community and they know what's safe. And so, you know, I have to respect that. Other groups, because of this lack of education, can very easily be taken advantage of by a leader within the group who is more literate and adept. There was a case at the co-op where one of the women on the board of directors, one of their jobs is to take the weavings, take the yarn, the warps to the communities and distribute them among the owners, the members, and then pick up the weavings. And they have a spreadsheet they keep track of, like how many scarves they dropped off and blah, blah. Well, this board member wrote down that she had given, you know, 4 warps to X woman. And this woman didn't know how to read. So she put her thumbprint by it. And the board member paid her for the 2 warps, you know, 2 weavings, and pocketed money for the other 2 weavings. So this is just an example of how people can be taken advantage of. It's horrible. Ensuring the rights of children. I think one thing that's really interesting with this is that a lot of people are teaching their children how to do their craft. And so their kids are doing some of the work just in learning, like, you know, after school or whatever. And the point is that we make sure that it's not just children working all the time, but, you know, that maybe they go to school and they're eating and they have other opportunities. And if they want to learn, which many young girls at the age of 6 and 7 want to learn weaving, so they're starting to learn weaving. And it's this way with a lot of fair trade groups around the world. Cultivate environmental stewardship. This is interesting, you know, just this also goes along with the lack of education and knowing about things like how do you handle the dye in a care, in a way where you wear a mask, you wear gloves, things that protect the person's health. And how is the dye water treated so it doesn't negatively impact the environment? Co-op has got this building plan, all the construction drawings for a new building, and it just passed the big environmental review. And that was part of the environmental review that the government does to make sure that wastewater is properly handled. So that was great to hear. The last one is respect cultural, racial, and ethnic identity. And there are a number of things that come up with this. Let's see, making items for the market in the North. So there's always the question about, are these the things people would make if they were just doing their thing? And these scarves are generally not the thing people would make if they were just doing their thing. And if I just bought stuff that's considered typical crafts here in Guatemala, by and large, people wouldn't buy it up there in the States. I mean, I've tried selling huipiles, I've tried selling a lot of traditional weavings, and they just sit. But the thing with the co-op is that what they use, the techniques that they use to make their own traditional weavings, which are their traditional blouses and belts and that kind of thing, use the same techniques as the dyeing, for instance, the haspe dyeing and backstrap loom weaving. So by making these things economically profitable for them, it keeps those arts going so that they can actually support their own traditions, cultural traditions, by making their own clothing. I had, here's an example, like color combinations, learning what color combinations work, because it's a different language of color here than there. And for instance, I'll find people just offer me stuff to buy. And if it's got yellow and orange in it, forget it. Nobody's going to buy it. If it's a bunch of different colors, maybe if they're like part of the plan, but generally speaking, that's like a regular color combination down here, but it doesn't go so well up in the States. Sometimes people will say, oh, these colors are so sad, like a black and brown scarf or an autumn scarf for the Northeast. But they're happy to have the work and they'll weave the sad colors. Let's see, there's a lot of appropriating and changing or tweaking indigenous designs and symbols that cannot be copyrighted by a whole culture. And you'll see this a lot in some of these designer things, where they're just taking the symbols or taking the designs and using them to make a pile of money. There's also using what is often called repurposed or recycled huipiles, the traditional blouses, and cutting them up and making coin purses and handbags. And this is very controversial because these items took often 2 months to make, and somebody goes out into some rural community and offers a woman $5 or $7 for this huipil, and because she doesn't have money to feed her kids today, she'll sell the shirt right off her back. And yet that doesn't mean she's going to spend 2 months making another one. Maybe she'll just go to the used clothing store where Planet Aid has sent bales of used clothing down here and they can buy a shirt for 50 cents. So these things like have a ripple effect. Let's see. Oh, and the last sort of thing that's been talked about a bunch at the Fair Trade Federation recently is it right to sell the artisan's story, or even to tell the artisan's story? Like, if you buy a scarf made by a weaver in the United States, they're not generally telling you their personal life story when they're selling you the scarf, and their product stands for itself. But in fair trade, I mean, my people have different opinions about this. My opinion is that you're not just selling the product, but you're inviting people to be part of a solution to a problem. And if you don't know what the problem is, then how can you really be part of the solution? So, and I think it's interesting, the artisans I work want their story to be told, and partly maybe because they know that it's going to pull at our heartstrings some, and maybe they'll buy our stuff. But I think it, to me, that makes sense. Anyway, I'll stop screen sharing now if I figure this out. Let's see. Stop share.
That was
Okay, here I am. Anyway, blah, blah.
Yeah, lots to discuss there. You know,
Yeah.
I was struck. But so just to clarify, and of course, I'd love others to also ask questions, but your role in this women's cooperative is to help connect them with markets, mainly in the United States. Would that be correct?
Yeah, although I think I've taken a little bit more of a role as just sort of I consider myself to be accompanying them. Like they can always call me. It's not just like some grant went in and fixed, you know, and did something for a year and now it's all good. It's really a long-term relationship, and they know if they haven't, like they didn't know how to deal with this board member that had stolen from them, and they came to me and told me the whole story, and we talked about it, like what things could they do, how could they deal with that. So it's more like accompanying them, and also I've helped them at trade shows. I've made catalogs for them and pamphlets in English, and done a lot of stuff that sort of, and been willing to be the person who, if they get a new customer who doesn't speak Spanish, they can place their first several orders through me. I won't charge them money and I won't charge the co-op, but I'll make sure the order's made properly to sort of make sure that the whole thing goes okay. So it doesn't get messed up the first time and then the customer goes, forget it, I'm not ordering from them anymore.
Okay.
You know.
But you're not actually doing the shipping to the United States.
Well, I ship my orders. They ship, we use the same shipper.
Okay.
So they ship to other customers through that shipper that uses DHL.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's really, it's heartbreaking to hear about the exploitation.
Yeah.
And just, you know, how much they're struggling. These women are struggling. I mean, I'm happy that they're able, it sounds like they're able to earn enough to support their families.
Yeah.
But they're still, you know, it's still hard.
Right. I mean, another thing that's interesting is they are earning money that makes a significant difference in their household. And so, you know, that could go various ways. It could go where the husband is jealous and angry about it. But it's interesting, they've sort of pulled the husbands in and gotten them on board with the idea that women are bringing in the money, and that these women, for instance, the women on the board of directors, they're going to go the hour into the main workshop a number of times each week. Usually Indigenous women in these very rural communities don't go anywhere. They stay at their home in their community. And so venturing forth other than to maybe go to the market is a big deal, you know? And it's really, I think it's opened a lot of their worlds a lot, you know, to have a bigger role. And
sure.
The other thing that's really helped is to just tell them again and again and again, and to even give them messages from people I sell to. These are beautiful products. They're incredibly well made. The weaving is some of the best in the world. And they're getting this story, they're getting the feedback from Novica also, because Novica, they're the largest weaving co-op selling through Novica in Guatemala. They're the most successful. They're probably the most successful artisan co-op in the whole country.
Wow.
That way. But to like keep telling them how beautiful and valuable and, worthwhile their work is, because many of them, they're like, you talk to them and they're like this. They finally started raising their heads and like looking at you.
Wow.
It's really like intense. It's really intense sometimes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Liza. Rafi has his hand up. Go ahead, Rafi.
I just wanted to ask, so I understand that I do feel like there's a lot of oppressive, like, maybe labor laws that are in place there. And I do think, it's great that you were able to maybe, advocate through like financial and other literacy skills. But when you said when things happen like that, that board member that did that, thing, or maybe children that are maybe brought into this, maybe exploited because of that, like what can you do like through your training to ensure that those people are getting the the right wages or the right working conditions?
Right. Well, I just tend to ask a lot of questions and encourage them to, for instance, if they need to raise their prices, I mean, I know what price will go in the United States, and really encourage them that their product does have value and they can raise the prices so that they can pay people more. I actually don't think that anyone I work with is using child labor in a way that, I would find objectionable. Or that you would find objectionable even, I mean, I'll tell you like 2 minutes about what happened with that board member was really interesting. They actually, before telling me the story, they kept her, she was president of the board. They kept her on as president of the board. One of the roles of the board president is to go to the bank with a check, cash the check and pay, and come back to the co-op with the money to pay the weavers for that period of time. She went with the treasurer. They cashed a check for the equivalent of $5,000. She staged a robbery from the bank back to the co-op and stole the $5,000. So now not only did they know she'd embezzled from them, but they finally came and told me about it when she'd stolen $5,000. Now, they'd already told all the women in the community, tomorrow morning, show up at the meeting place and you're going to get paid for the month or for the 2 weeks or whatever it was. So they showed up and they said, well, the money, it's been stolen. And at that point, they couldn't accuse her of having set this up, but that's absolutely what happened. And then it eventually came out that she had embezzled the money, and they had all the men in the community were there at this meeting, and the meeting went on for like 8 or 9 hours. And they at first they decided, at first they showed up. They said, we're not coming today, we'll come tomorrow with the money. And they went and got the money because they have enough money to make up for it. So then they took the money and paid the women and had this big meeting. The women said, how do you have that money? You're the ones that stole them. I mean, it was like everybody get into this big blaming, accusing mode. I wasn't there. I was back at the co-op with a few people, and I was hearing, they kept calling me and telling me like, what's going on? So they finally decided they weren't going to allow this woman to be part of the co-op anymore. She had to repay the money that she had embezzled, and they weren't going to allow her mother to be part of the co-op anymore either. And the next morning, she and her mother went to the indigenous mayor of Sololá, the indigenous, I guess he's the governor, and his job is to do conflict resolution. They went and accused the co-op of not paying her for the work she'd done. And so they had to take all the documentation in there. And the mayor said, after hearing the whole case, you can say she can't be part of the co-op, but you can't say her mother can't be part of the co-op. And so that was what was decided. And she was supposed to pay them back. She never paid them back. She actually left the community because this is also part of what happens is people sort of get shunned. They get told, you know, you've done a major harm to our community. You can't live here anymore. And I don't even think they had to tell her that. I think she just left. It was really intense.
Wow.
That
But
sounds
it was
very-
interesting to know how they handled it. I mean, it may have been different than how I would have handled it, you know, or how we would have handled it in the States, maybe. Yeah.
Thank you, Eliza.
Yeah.
Cora.
Hello, thank you very much. So I have two questions. One is the language fluency,
Oh,
the
yeah.
language, because you mentioned that they're Maya, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that they're mostly illiterate. So how do you communicate? What languages? How? Yeah, how do you do that?
They speak, all of them speak Cachiquel. Some of them speak Spanish. I would say over half of them do not speak Spanish.
Mm.
And I'm very used to speaking with some of them and everybody else speaking Cachiquel and like having a whole like discussion that I have no idea what they're saying. Somebody will say something. The people who are working in the main workshop pretty much speak Spanish.
So how do they talk to you and how do you speak to them? And you know,
Spanish.
in
Yeah,
Spanish.
Spanish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is part of the reason why I went back and did a whole other round of learning Spanish, because it became clear to me that I really needed to up my game. You know?
Okay, one more short question. How do
Mhm.
they travel? How do they get to the workshop?
They travel, sometimes they walk up a very long hill because their villages tend to be down a long hill from the main highway. So they often walk up the hill on dirt roads, and then they take a pickup to the next bus stop. And then they get a chicken bus down to the weaving co-op. The weaving
How long does that take them from?
It takes probably 45 minutes to an hour.
Wow.
Each way?
Yep. They also have sort of a cooperative household during the week at the co-op. They have a second building that's on the property where the people who are working there every day stay overnight, Monday morning through, you know, Friday night they go home.
Mm.
And they all cook their meals together, and they don't go back and forth every day.
Mm.
So, and then a lot of the dyers aren't actually living in those communities. They live in town, so they just come in, they live closer by.
I'm going to cheat a little bit because I said two questions, but bear with me. It's based, now this is based on something that you said earlier.
Mhm.
When the woman embezzled the
Yeah, the
money,
one woman, right?
and they treated her, they shunned her. And it makes me think about what you said about anger, that anger is not permitted, it's not allowed, it's not, all right?
Right.
So I'm wondering if this shunning, you know, if the anger could possibly cause, you know, a killing or somebody's death, I wonder if the same kind of value isn't seen through, you know, confronting her for embezzling.
Right. Right. Well, it's interesting because in that meeting, she was in that big meeting where there were probably 150 people. Yeah, there was some really funny thing. I'm trying to remember what happened. Oh, I can't remember exactly. You would find it funny what some guy said about the whole thing. But the reason they find anger so dangerous is because during the genocide, there were instances that everybody knows of where somebody was angry with somebody else and they turned them into the military, or somebody was jealous. Jealousy is another thing. Having somebody be jealous of you is felt to be really a dangerous thing, because people were, you know, the janitor at the co-op for probably 20 years was this guy who at like 17 was a very successful farmer, and he had a pickup truck, and his cousin was jealous of him turned him into the military. He was tortured and left for dead in a ditch. He ended up in Chicago for 2 years doing surgery and rehab, but he looked like he had a terrible stroke. And he worked at the it was a reminder almost that this is what can happen. And everybody knows somebody. Like during the genocide, there were people in your community who were part of a civilian defense patrol who were reporting to the army what was happening with their neighbors, and who maybe was responsible for your father being disappeared. I mean, it just horrible, horrible trauma, horrible. And everybody, every single woman in that co-op has a story that's just horrifying.
Was this the 1980s?
Yeah, it was mainly 1980 to 82 was the worst of it. Yeah, but it went on from 1960 to 1996, but the worst of it was in the early 80s. Yeah.
Wow, that's really awful. Julie, you're muted.
Yeah, I just, sorry. I just a couple comments. The first one is I'm hoping that you, Eliza, and Yunata saw Valerie Hall's message in this chat.
Oh yeah, look.
Yeah, do take a look.
I'm so sorry that she didn't introduce herself earlier.
Yeah, I am too.
Oh,
the other thing is just silly, but I recognized quite a proportion of the fabrics because of the purses and the scarves that I have that I just love. And I miss you at the festival.
I know, I miss being there. That was like one of the funnest festivals to go to. I still remember the group singing the Fair Trade song on the stage behind me, and lovely people. Yeah.
Well, thank you for my wardrobe.
You're very welcome. I'll tell them you love it.
Please do.
I was curious also, you mentioned about the Czech glass beads, and I'm really very intrigued. I know one young man who started a glass bead business from Czechoslovakia. Do the Czechs have a global monopoly on making these beads? I mean,
yeah, they don't have
if the beads are made from glass, why can't local people all over the world make these beads? Why are these Czech beads like
such
I don't know.
deal?
I just don't understand it.
Yeah. Well, they're basically 3 kinds of glass beads. There's Chinese glass beads, which are low quality. And sometimes, for instance, the color will wear off on your skin. Or Czech glass beads are very high quality. And if you look at them, they've been making them for a very long time, probably hundreds of years. If you look at them under the microscope, they refract the light in many different ways. And they're just really high quality beads. And the next highest quality, which is Japanese beads, Miyuki beads. They're often these like teeny tiny glass beads that you see, but they're exceedingly expensive. I mean, they're used by high-end jewelry makers. They're just very expensive.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But there's nothing unique about these locations because glass can be made anywhere, correct? So it's just the actual craft that for some reason in this particular place in Czechoslovakia, they have hundreds of years of history and craftspersonship. But the glass bead making could be done really anywhere. Am I saying that right?
Perhaps. It's probably pretty complicated though. You know, it's probably like, how do you get this color uniformly all the time? How do you get like rounded edges that aren't going to scratch? You know, there's like uniform size of the hole and the size of the, you know, all these things that people look for. I bet it's complicated. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's interesting. And the other interesting thing is that the size of beads that people use here, which is size 10, one place in the United States sells size 10, one wholesaler. They all sell size 11 or size, whatever. So it's not so easy just to obtain them in the States and bring them down.
So they really have to get it from this person who's ordering from Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
Were you impacted by there was shipping disruptions all over the world and things were taking
Yeah.
months?
I think that the co-op I know they got some big orders from China of yarn and thread, and I don't think there was any holdup on it. I wonder how much of it is also just the ports in the United States that can't unload stuff fast enough versus, I'm not sure the ports down here are as jammed up. The boats come right into the port in Guatemala.
Okay.
I personally haven't had, shipping DHL has been no problem. It all goes by air. Yeah. So, I haven't had any problem with that. The prices of all that shipping have gone up a lot. I'm
Sure.
definitely paying more for shipping. Yeah.
Rafi.
Hi, I'm Karen. I'm Rafi's mom. I just had one question about when you were talking about the beads from Czechoslovakia. Now it's Czech and the Czech Republic and Slovakia. So I was curious, is it from both of them, or is it from just? I'm just curious, just because
I think it must be the Czech Republic. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's the Czech Republic.
Oh, okay. And they're the ones that are very expensive. Is that what you were saying? I can't remember what you
No,
said.
the Japanese beads are more expensive.
Oh,
The
okay.
Chinese beads are super cheap. But yeah, people wouldn't be happy if I sold stuff with Chinese beads.
Which are the ones that people prefer? I'm just curious. Are they just all different?
Oh, Czech glass beads, yeah.
The Czech
Or
one?
the Japanese, but they're really pretty expensive. Like if I'd have to sell stuff for probably double the price at least if they were made from the Japanese beads.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Do you have a connection with the Czech Republic, Karen?
Oh, yeah. Well, Larry's half Slovakian, and we went to Czechoslovakia many years, 25 years ago, when it was still part of Russian satellite, whatever. But yeah, I was just curious because we went there, and he has family still there in Slovakia. So I was just curious because I know they were kind of poor in Slovakia. In Czech, they were a little more well off, in Prague anyway. So yeah, I was just curious about that. So.
Yeah.